Oversea Under Stone by Susan Cooper. Epilogue. The sound of clapping echoed through the gloomy pillows of the long museum gallery, and Simon, very pink in the face, threaded his way back to Barney and Jane through the crowd of gravely smiling scholars and dons. The crowd began to move about again, and voices rose in a genial chatter all around them. A bright-eyed young man with a notebook materialized at their side. "That was a very nice speech, Simon, if I may say so. This is Jane and Barnabas, is it?" Simon blinked at him and nodded. "I'm from the Press Association," said the young man briskly. "Can I ask you how large a check the curator presented you with?" Simon looked down at the envelope in his hand, put his finger nervously in the flap, and tore it open. He took out the neatly folded check, gazed at it for several moments, and without a word passed it across to Jane. Jane looked at it and swallowed. "It says £100. "Gosh," said Barney. "Well, that's nice," said the young man cheerfully. "Congratulations. Now then, what will you do with it?" They looked at him blankly. "I don't know," said Simon at last. "Oh, come now," the young man persisted. "You must have some idea. What are things you've always most wanted to buy?" The children looked at one another helplessly. "Young man," said Great-Uncle Mary, his deep voice beside them, "if you were suddenly presented with £100, what would you buy?" The reporter looked taken aback. "Well, Precisely," said Great-Uncle Mary. "You don't know. Neither do these children. Good afternoon." "Just one more thing," said the young man unabashed, writing rapid shorthand squiggles in his notebook. "What were you actually doing when you found the thing?" "The Grail, you mean," Barney said. "Well, yes. That's what you like to call it, isn't it?" said the young man lightly. Barney glared at him indignantly. "We just happened to be exploring a cave," Simon said, "and we found it on a ledge." "Was there talk of someone else having been after it?" "Moonshine," said Great-Uncle Mary firmly. "Now look here, my boy. You go off and talk to the curator. Just over there, he knows all about it. These three have had enough excitement for one day." The young man opened his mouth to say something else, looked at Great-Uncle Mary, and shut it again. He grinned amiably and disappeared into the crowd, and Great-Uncle Mary steered the children into a quiet corner behind a pillar. "Well," he said, You'll have your pictures in all the papers tomorrow. You'll be written about in books for years to come by a lot of distinguished scholarly gentlemen, and you've been given £100 by one of the most famous museums in the world, and I must say you all deserve it." "Gummery," said Simon thoughtfully, I know there'd be no point in telling people the real story behind finding the Grail, but wouldn't it be a good thing at least to warn them about Mr. Hastings? I mean, he got hold of Mrs. Polk and that boy Bill and made them bad, and there's nothing to stop him going round and doing it to everyone." "He has gone," Great-Uncle Mary said. Two owl-like men in heavy spectacles passing bowed respectfully to him, and he nodded vaguely. "I know, but he might come back." Great-Uncle Mary looked down the long gallery over the heads, and the old closed look came back into his face. "When he does come back," he said, "it will not be as Mr. Hastings." "Wasn't his name really Hastings at all?" Simon said curiously. "I have known him to use many different names," Great-Uncle Mary said, "at many different times." Jane slid one foot unhappily to and fro over the smooth marble floor. "It seems so awful that a vicar should be so bad." "He must have kidded all the bishops and things into thinking he was good," Simon said. "Same as he kidded everyone in Trewissick." "Not at all," Great-Uncle Mary said. Simon stared at him. "But he must have. I mean, they must have heard him preaching sermons on Sundays." "No one heard him preaching on Sundays, and I doubt if he had ever met a bishop in his life." Now they were all staring at him in such baffled amazement that the sides of his mouth twitched into a half-smile. "It's quite simple. What they call the power of suggestion. Our Mr. Hastings was not the vicar of Trewissick, nor anything to do with him. I know the real vicar slightly. He is a tall man as well, though rather thin and about 70 years old. His name is Smith." "But Mr. Hastings lived in the vicarage," Barney said. "It was the vicarage once. Now it's let out to anyone who wants to rent it. The parish council decided years ago that it was much too big for Mr. Smith to live alone in it, like a pea in a pod, and they found him a little cottage on the other side of the church.
And when I went to find him, Jane said slowly, trying to remember, I didn't ask anyone where he lived. I just said to an old man by the church, is that the vicarage? And all he said was yes. He was a rather bad-tempered old man, I think. And do you know, Gummery, I don't think Mr. Hastings actually told me he was the vicar. I just took it for granted that he said something about his replacing Mr. Hawes-Mellor there. But he must have known I thought he was.
Oh, yes. He wasn't going to disillusion you until he'd found out what you were up to. He knew perfectly well who you were.
Did he really?
From the moment he opened his front door.
Oh, said Jane, and she thought about it and felt cold. Oh.
So from that moment we all went on thinking
he was the vicar, Simon said. And if ever we mentioned him to anybody, like Mr. Penhallow, they must have thought we meant the real vicar. But, Gummery, didn't you know? Great-uncle Mary chuckled.
No, that's what I thought as well. For some time, right up to the last, I entertained the most terrible suspicions of poor harmless Mr. Smith, Barney said unexpectedly.
But if you'd been against Mr. Hastings before, surely you couldn't mistake anybody else for him.
He changes, Great-uncle Mary said vaguely, deliberately looking away again. There is no knowing what he will look like.
And there was a finality in the ring of his voice that forbade any further questions, as they knew there would always be when they tried to ask more about the mysterious enemy of their days in Trewisick. This was one of the things from Great-uncle Mary's secret world, and even though they had been so much involved, they knew he would keep his secrets as he always had. Simon looked down at the check in his hand. We found the Grail, he said, and everyone seems frightfully excited about it. But it isn't any use on its own, is it? The Cornishman said if whoever found it had other words from him on the second manuscript that we didn't even have a chance to look at, that they'd be able to understand what was written on the Grail and know the secret of it all, but we shan't ever know because the manuscripts are at the bottom of the sea, Barney said gloomily. We failed, really. Great-uncle Mary said nothing, and when they looked up at him, hearing only the hum of voices from the crowd, he seemed to be towering over them, as tall and slim as a pillar at his side.
Failed, he said, and he was smiling. Oh, no, is that really what you think? You haven't failed. The hunt for the Grail was a battle as important in its way as any battle that's ever been fought, and you won it, the three of you. The powers behind the man calling himself Hastings came very near to winning. And what that victory would have meant if the secret of the Grail had been given into their hands is more than anyone dare think, but thanks to you the vital secret they needed is safe from them still, for as many centuries perhaps as it was before. Safe, not destroyed, Simon. The first manuscript, your map, will certainly have disintegrated at once in the sea, but that was no more use to anyone once it had led you to the second, and the Grail. It might have made my colleagues even more excited, he glanced round the room and chuckled, but that's no matter. The point is that the second manuscript, down under the sea, is sealed up in its case, which will resist sea-water indefinitely if it's made of lead. So, the last secret is safe and hidden, so well hidden at the bottom of Trewisick Bay that they could never even begin the long business of searching for it without our being able to find out. And to stop them, they have lost their chance.
And so have we, Simon said bitterly, seeing again the picture that had never properly left his mind. He thought of the glinting brass telescope case, with both precious manuscripts sealed inside, flying from his desperate hand, and then, only yards from Great-uncle Mary's safe grasp, jerking away from the raised oar to break and plunge its contents forever into the sea. No, we haven't, said Jane unexpectedly. She was thinking of the same moment, and she was out of the cool marble vastness of the museum, back on Kamar Head in the excitement of the scorching sun. We do know where it is. I was standing by the only thing that could mark it, that deep pool in the rocks. It was just on the edge, and the lead case went down right in front of me. So we should know where to look if we ever went back. For a moment Great-uncle Mary looked alarmed.
I had no idea of that. Then the others will have noticed the same thing, and they will be able to go straight to the spot, dive for the manuscript, and be away with it before anyone has time to ever notice they are there." "No, they won't," Jane said, pink in earnest. "That's the best thing at all, Gummery. You see, we only noticed that pool in the first place because we came across it when the tide was at its lowest. By the time we were on our way back to the beach, the water had covered it again. Mr. Withers fell into it, but he didn't know he had. So if there was ever a tide as low as that again, we should be able to look for the pool and find the second manuscript. But the enemy wouldn't, because they don't know about the pool at all." "Can't we go back?" Simon said eagerly. "Can we go back, Gummery?" "Can't we go back?" Simon said eagerly. "Can we go back, Gummery, and have someone dive for it?" "One day, perhaps," Great Uncle Mary said, and then, before he could say anything more, a group of men from the murmuring crowd all round them had turned toward him. "Ah, Professor Lyon, if you have a moment, might I interest you to Dr. Theodore Riesenstantz?" "I'm a great disciple of yours," an intense little man with a pointed beard said to Great Uncle Mary as he took his hand. "Merriman Lyon is a name much honored in my country." "Come on," Simon said in an undertone, and the children slipped away to stand at the edge of the crowd, while the bald heads and gray beards wagged and chattered solemnly. They looked across the shimmering floor to the lone glass case where the Grail stood like a golden star. Barney was gazing into space as if he were coming out of a trance. "Wake up," Jane said cheerfully. Barney said slowly, "Is that his real name?" "Whose name?" "Great Uncle Mary." "Is he really called Merriman?" "Well, of course, that's what Mary is short for." "I didn't know," Barney said. "I always thought that Mary was a nickname." "Merriman Lyon? Funny name, isn't it?" said Simon lightly. "Come on, let's go have another look at the Grail. I want to see what it says about us again." He moved round the edge of the crowd with Jane, but Barney stayed where he was. "Merriman Lyon," he said softly to himself. "Mary Lyon? Merlion? Merlin?" He looked across the room to where Great Uncle Mary's white head towered over the rest, slightly bent as he listened to what someone else was saying. The angular brown face seemed more than ever like an old carving, deep eyes shadowed and mysterious above the fierce nose. "No," Barney said aloud, and he shook himself. "It's not possible." But as he followed Simon and Jane, he glanced back over his shoulder wondering, and Great Uncle Mary, as if he knew, turned his head and looked him full in the face for an instant across the crowd, smiled very faintly, and looked away again. All the way up the immense gallery, over its glistening stone floor, row upon row of identical glass cases stretched into the distance, with pots, daggers, coins, strange twisted pieces of bronze, and leather and wood, all shut quiet inside like butterflies caught on pins. The case which held the Grail was taller than the rest, a high glass box in a place of honor in the center of the great gallery, with nothing inside it but one shining cup, cleaned now to brilliant gold, poised on a heavy black plinth. A neat silver square beneath was engraved with the words, "Gold chalice of unknown Celtic workmanship, believed 6th century, found in Trewesick, South Cornwall, and presented by Simon, Jane, and Barnabas Drew." They moved round the case, looking at the Grail. Its curved, engraved sides had been meticulously cleaned, and now that the beaten gold was free of the dirt left by centuries in the cave under Kamar Head, every line of the engraving was clear. They saw that it was divided into 5 panels, that 4 of the 5 were covered with pictures of men fighting, brandishing swords and spears, crouching behind shields, dressed not in armor but in strange tunics ending above their knees. They wore helmets on their heads, but the helmets, curving down over the backs of their necks, were like no shape the children had ever seen before. Between the figures, interweaving like pictures of a tapestry, words and letters were closely engraved. The last panel, the 5th, was completely covered in words, as close written as the scrawled black lines had been in the manuscript. But all these words on the Golden Grail, the children knew, were in a language nobody, from Great Uncle Mary to the museum experts, had been able to understand. And there we will pause.